I mean, it is that kind of downbeatness of which always kind of permeates because of it's because of that loss of high margin revenue that and the immense cost of the infrastructure which the operators are having to bear on their own, and maybe that's something that will have to change in some way, because the big hyperscalers aren't going to be able to execute on their consumer activities without CSPs networked, and if CSPs can't afford to build 5G to the level that it needs to be built, the promise of 5G won't happen. So that's the depressing side.
Hello and welcome to this special edition of the Telecoms.com podcast. We're from Mobile World Congress and Ericsson's been kind enough to let us film from their stand. So thanks a lot, Pia. Shout out to you. And yeah, it's the normal hectic thing at the end of Mobile World Congress. Everyone's knackered, everyone's hungover. We're going to just try and see what we can reflect on the week. I'll start by talking. I think I've only written one thing this week.
Yeah.
But I wrote that from the Ericsson stand, funnily enough. People are going to think I'm employed by you. Actually, before I go any further...
You've lived here, basically.
I should introduce that we've got a special guest, Peter Linder from Ericsson. Thanks a lot for coming on, Peter.
Thank you very much. Pressure's all mine.
So, and I wrote an article at the start of the week from the stand where I was just chatting to Pia and some of her colleagues, and for some reason the metaphor about buying a coffee from like Starbucks entered my mind, and comparing that to the telecoms industry. In other words, you buy coffee now, there's 10 different types of beans, types of milk, types of froth, types of crap you put on top of it. And it just feels, my feeling from the show and from some of the briefs we had before is that it's just getting increasingly complicated, this industry, in terms of choice, in terms of variables, in terms of also trying to articulate the propositions. Now, that's not necessarily bad, but I think it's a common challenge that we all have. You're on the vendor side, we're on the journalist side, and we'll get a colleague of mine from the analyst side on to talk about that in a sec. So that was, I think, my biggest theme from the show has just been complexity, choice, difficulty in. I mean, I wrote a piece just before the show just saying, what's the point of 5G? And I wasn't just trying to be a dick. I was just trying to say that we're not really that sure what precisely the point of it is. I'm sure it's got lots of points, and I'm sure Peter in a sec will invite you to put me straight. But that was where I was coming at. So that's me. What about you, Ian? Any major themes jumping out?
Yeah, there's a few. I mean,
and cheers, by the way.
Cheers, yeah. Good to be here. And yeah, thanks to Ericsson. There's quite a few. There's a lot going on, obviously, and it's bigger than it was last year. So there's even more going on. I mean, there's various things I could talk about. There's all the keynote stage discussions going on where there's the usual concerns about the state of regulation and some of these themes like fair share coming up and industry consolidation, and maybe it's a little bit more relevant this year because the EU does seem to be taking a look at some of these things and having a hard think about them, whereas in previous years it's just sort of.
I don't know if you saw it. It was one of the hard things for us as journalists is to see what the breaking news is, because we're just running around doing
I've
interviews.
tried to make an effort to sort of have a bird's eye view.
So I noticed one from yesterday. The CEO, I think, of Netflix did a keynote here.
Right.
And he was basically going, you start charging us for the network stuff, the fair contribution, and that's going to hit content budgets, which I suppose is an inevitable line for them to take, but it's still
Well, I think that shows all the challenges of fair share, that I don't think I'm not sure how workable it is. And the other one that stood out for me actually was, I mean, we're on Ericsson stand, but the CEO, Boy Ekholm, I think, was speaking to CNBC, I think it was, talking about it not being sustainable, having essentially the industry structured this way. Customers aren't spending money. There's always this concern for companies like Ericsson about the pace of 5G build out in this market. If you compare it to somewhere like South Korea, for instance, where it's very densified and there seems to be a lot more investment in mid-band. I think those are kind of high level topics. I mean, there's loads I could pick on because there's quite a lot from open APIs and things like that.
We might come back to that.
To 5G and to 6G, to some of the vRAN stuff I've been talking to people about. But the one for me, I suppose, is a public cloud. Just a lot more noticeable here than they have been in the past. And there were quite a few announcements from Microsoft coming into the show. And then my colleague Mike Dano has been running around and chatting to AWS and Google. And they all have their slightly different proposition, but they are much more involved in this space than they were. I mean, I spoke with Microsoft and they were talking about doing the sort of things even that we'd associate more with VMware and Red Hat in the past. Actually putting their platforms on a it's a fully hybrid cloud, but you've got the same platform can support public and on premises.
We're having to understand the more IT techie side of things.
This ties in with your coffee thing because this is incredibly complicated.
It is.
I mean, you've got people like whenever you write about AT&T and say they've done something very risky. They've put their 5G core in the public cloud. There's a lot of pushback. They go, no, it isn't in the public cloud. It's actually on premises. It's just using Microsoft's platform, but they're still reliant on a hyperscaler platform, and then so the slight pushback against that, I think, is coming from Europe. I was chatting to Orange's CTO a bit earlier, Mikhail Trabia. There's this initiative called Silver, which is an effort to bring some kind of standardization into this area. If you have one challenge for companies like Ericsson is developing network functions that are then going to be able to be hosted in these different cloud environments. And if you move it from one to the other, it has to be it has to be adapted, and it's not the same. And their hope through Silver, I mean, it's another.
And to quote another CTO, it's a pain in the arse to do.
Exactly. So Silver's trying to bring some kind of standardization to that, and a push for common practices to be used. I don't know where it's going to go, but I think the whole public cloud and what the alternatives are is a massive theme here.
No, that's a really good overview. So Peter, from a personal or an Ericsson or both perspective, what have been the big themes for you?
I think the big thing for me is 4 years since I was here last time, so I didn't see it like now. It's a little bit slower. I think that the big difference that we've seen that is tremendous interest in the 5G revenue generation as a main top theme. Right now, when we come quite a bit into the deployment of the networks, we've converted the first group of customers from 4G to 5G. In most markets with some kind of a model with upselling into some better packages and more services. But I fully agree with your coffee analogy. They're more complex packages. Yeah. The security with or without the MiFi router, a bit more of this, less of that. So more differentiated offerings on the base offerings. And then tied to that whole revenue generation, we're looking at out of all the different new applications, what has been a success so far? Well, fixed wireless access has gone from hey, can it really work, to actually capturing pretty much all fixed net add growth in the US, for example. So I think this theme is a little bit characteristic for where we are in the market. If we talk analogies, I often talk about, I say in our business, it's like selling mobile broadband and smartphones to everybody. It's like being in the cheese store selling Parmesan wheels. A lot of the same thing and just rolling out 84-pound wheels of cheese all the time. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden now we have to deal with 3 ounces of Gorgonzola, 3 ounces of brie, like smaller revenue stream and things that we haven't really sold.
I'll throw that into the metaphor mix with my coffee one. We got cheese as well now.
Yeah, we got a cheesy one. Yeah. So I think that is the central theme for. Yeah, I think for where also see where we see most of the traction, where people are hanging around most of the time.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, and I think it's not a criticism because it is what it is, but it presents a challenge for all of us, sort of communicating it. And I also get a slight sense, you might push back on this, but I get a slight sense of the industry being in a slight lull. So we've had 4 years of sort of 5G hype and initial build out, but a lot of the promised business models that's supposed to come from it still seem to be at quite an early stage. Yep. So it feels like we're in a lull. We're getting ready. I mean, this is obviously very relevant to Ericsson, the whole network exposure thing and the API thing, which was a big theme. But I know, we've spoken about it on the pod before. We feel like it's quite a gamble by Ericsson because it's quite unproven. So I mean,
no, but I think it's very clear. I went through a journey in 2019. I essentially shifted from going out and talking to service providers to essentially going out and talking with service providers to different enterprise customers. At the same time, I was trying to teach my mom what 5G was. Yeah. And she was down the road, G5. She sold G5 all the time. And I said, no, it's 5G. It works in a different way. And when I realized that the kind of things I was trying to get my mom to understand was not very different from what I was speaking with enterprise customer about as what some of the fundamentals were. So there has been a phenomenal, I would say, a learning curve, almost like going into taking a college degree in terms of like getting up to speed and say, this is what it is, this is what you can do. Because I think many people on the enterprise side came into it and said, hey, 4G, we know what it is. It's like sunlight. It's everywhere on the outside, and it goes through windows, and it's on the inside too. And then we came with
mobile broadband. It was a simple proposition.
It's a very simple proposition. And now then when we came with 5G, I said, oh, now we got low bands and mid bands and high bands. What are you talking about? And yeah, you might need some special solution indoors. What do you mean? We still have windows. Why can't the 5G come in through the windows the way it used to do? So I think that there's the learning curve and the education that has to have taken place. I think was bigger than anyone expected, and it's taken longer.
Yeah.
And especially taken longer also when you come from building something full custom, doing like a big football game or like the ones we had in the States a couple of weeks ago, to actually what if we did go down one level and start replicating it and get so you can actually build scale around different. I often talk about use places where the really the locations where 5G can make a big difference, like in a sports venue or a factory or a university campus, and what does it take to get that particular use place lit up, and what are the business models for doing it? So
yeah, there's a bit of skepticism, I think, on the show floor about the ability to monetize these APIs. You know, I mean, it's not just to do with the Ericsson Vonage move, but the general broader sort of Kamara initiative. And I mean, I don't know what you think about that. Whether you've seen anything in your work that you know provides some insight into that kind of thing.
I see one really big thing I see in my work is that when you try to monetize it the way you've always monetized it, meaning that, hey, now we need to sell the person that's using it on another $5 on the communications bill or something like that. When you're going straight to it, like I can see challenges when you're going into an airport and you're lighting up with an airport with really, really good connectivity. If you're going to sell that for $5 extra, so. And then the fundamental difference between which business model are you using? Are you using an opt-in model where you have to stripe up the whole place? Hey, you can now get really fantastic 5G connectivity here. Just sign up for $5. Versus if it's an opt-out, or if it is, hey, I'm paying $310 for the tickets. 1% of that goes to the connectivity proposition. So I think it's worthwhile to look at the bigger values we unlock. And then, can we take a percentage of something really big, and monetize it?
There's no one fixed business model here. It could be the airport paying for.
It can be the airport paying as part. Could be the sports venue paying. Like I'm crazy about Formula One. When I pay like $400 or $500 for a ticket, would I notice if it was $525? And if I say, hey, now you can give $525, and it's really good 5G connectivity for the application you do around it. So when we approach it like that, then perhaps when we're looking at the office, saying, hey, should this really be trying to go for the IT communications bill and trying to get people to pay $25 extra, or should it be part of the rental fee for the office rent or something like that? So I see early signs that some of these things are, hey, where's the real big benefits here, and how can we create an easier sell, and also a sell that drives a quicker ramp up? Because if you could get into a building, an airport, and capture all passengers, you can go for lower price points than versus if you sell it individually. A little bit like what happened with broadcast when you're Hollywood selling to 3 big cable guys, and then you cover the whole of America with 100 million clients, and you get $4. If you then go over to streaming, you earn $8, but now you have to do 100 million sales to get to that point. So
no, I think that's a good analogy, and I get a sense of build it and they will come with the telecoms industry right now. There's a lot of speculative investment being made without a guarantee of a return, but they're kind of betting, just as Ericsson was betting with its big acquisition of Vonage. They're kind of betting that it will pay off, but it's not guaranteed. I was last night we went out and had a dinner with BT, and I was chatting to their head of consumer, Mark Alera, and I was saying on the subject of what you were just discussing, I was just saying I get it in principle. I just don't think I would pay. Let's say on my phone, I had an opportunity, just a one-click pay for some kind of premium communication service. There's a sort of cultural shift that needs to happen. Right now, I haven't got my head around it. And his pushback was like, well, would you pay for speedy boarding on the plane or something like that? And so his point was there's all sorts of things where we will pay a spot premium. But I think it's educating the market, because we're used to just getting our phone contract and that's it. It's just flat. It just works. There's no variability to it. So I think that's going to be an education job we've got to do on the market.
Yeah, no, but I think it's a little bit like I often use an analogy when we buy mobile broadband today. We buy it like we buy jeans. There's skinny jeans, there's regular jeans, and there's baggy jeans. It comes in different, but it's jeans, and you can use it with everything. All the apps is a little bit like buying T-shirts. You can buy hundreds of different T-shirts, go to different stores. It always works with the jeans, but there's no really link between the purchase of the T-shirt and purchase of the jeans. They're decoupled. So now when we're looking at more, what are the kind of more advanced experiences that you're looking at going forward? And saying, hey, if I got this experience, if I'm going to pay for the show of connecting with my favorite hockey team and to their super fan experience, which works in the arena, works when I'm out, perhaps I want that to really work well. And that my expectation is that, hey, if that is linked to premium connectivity, that is linked to that particular application. So it's not like going to one store buying jeans and another store and buying T-shirt, but going to a store and buying 2 pairs of shoes, which is the application experience and the connectivity experience together. That's a little bit that I see potential that the networks can do a lot more for applications, and that is a little bit the whole driving force behind what we're doing with Vonage. And then we're trying to find how do we find the glue to link those two together in a simple way, so that not every single application developer has to talk to 700 service providers across the world and vice versa. Finding some ways to streamline it in the middle. But we're a little bit in the early days, but I think it's relevant to look at what Vonage has done with UCaaS and saying, hey, for very simple things, integrating SMS and communication services in all kinds of different applications, giving people choice. What if we extend that model to more capabilities in the network?
I suppose, I mean, one example that gets I did meet Vonage earlier actually, and having not covered this topic before, it was one of those meetings where you're sitting asking a lot of questions. How does this work? And there's a lot of bits of the jigsaw and things being figured out. And I probably need to look over some notes and then talk to them again next week before I even go near it as a story. But I get the whole, you know, from a developer's perspective, you definitely don't want to be doing an application that only an operator in Denmark is ever going to use, because because it has unique APIs and this idea of a community uniform approach. For sure, it makes the telecom sector look a little bit more like a giant hyperscaler in a sense, and an appealing thing to be involved in. I suppose the concern then is differentiation, maybe, you know, that you could feasibly have the same gaming company providing a service on all the UK networks, and then it becomes harder to sort of, you know, have an offering that's different from a service perspective. But and the things to me that have been talked about this way, having been done this way, are things like two-factor authentication, aren't they? I suppose that Twilio was involved in. I think Vonage has done some of that. I mean, I see why that would make sense from a developer perspective, but it's not really something that operators have necessarily done particularly well out of.
No, but I think there's quite a few things that can be done if we look forward. When we look at experiences that we're trying to unlock that delivers a little bit more than what you regularly would have been expected, and saying that asking the question, is there anything in the network that can make this application better if I had access to it? I think that is a good
way of summarizing it.
It's a good starting question for the conversation, because if you can't articulate that and saying, hey, we know that gaming is decent, it will not be better with lower latency. If you're clear on that. I discussed a little bit with the guys. One of the solutions we're talking about here is connecting broadcast cameras and to the network, and we said, what's the difference of doing that today with you do it today with putting in 4 different SIM cards and using the capacity wherever it happened to be available, and you get it over to the other end and it goes out. I said, what is the biggest difference we can do if we created a slice in the network and connected that to your camera? What would you do? And he said, it's a very simple thing. Hey, I could use 2 cameras at the same time. What do you mean? Yeah, because otherwise, if I have 2 different cameras connected the way it is today, there'll be 1 to 1.5 second lag between the 2 cameras, inevitably. And 1.5 second lag in a show like this, it would be horrible to watch. So I think it's a little bit the eye-opener when finding those things and talking very much closely to people that do that. What would you do if you had this? and then asking the question: is this even something that people are prepared to pay?
Is it very different? Because I know one of the things that when it was talked about on day one, there were a few groans and people saying, "Oh, not APIs again." Didn't the GSMA try and do that years ago with one APIs? But is this a very, very different thing from that particular
And
initiative?
just so you know, after this one,
yeah.
I'm gonna be all strict with time management.
Okay.
But please do answer that.
Okay. So I think that we're a little bit. We have tested some of the foundations right now with previous applications. So I think we have a significantly shorter runway. When it's been proven in the past, I'm not quite sure we have had the same kind of foundation, both from a technology perspective and from a business model perspective. But I think this time around, I see both the technology and the business model being more vetted when we start talking about it. Same way as we talk about AI here at the show. Like, it's not so much about what you could do with AI sometime in the future. Hey, these are things that we have done with AI now for performance and like an improve different kind of things. So I feel that we're starting to talk about it way deeper into the journey.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks. Well, thanks again for coming on. The only reason I'm having to be so strict, this is a bit of a running joke on the pod because it used to be an hour long and I've let it run to about 2 hours these days. But we also know that Pierre's got a plane to catch, so we've got to knock this on the head in about an hour from now at the latest, and we've got a few people to come on. So what we're going to do is thank you for that, and I'm going to invite some other guests on, and we're just going to do a bit of a tag teaming. So thanks again, Peter. It's great to meet you.
A pleasure being here. Thank you very much.
Nice to meet you,
I'll
Peter.
take the mic off you. And now I'm going to invite on my colleague, analyst Dario Talmesio. that was a cameraman wondering whether he wants to bring his carton of water on. You don't fancy a beer, Dario?
I'm okay with water for now,
worries, mate.
but later on for sure I'll catch up with you.
So, Dario, you've been on the pod a couple of times. It always seems to be, well, not always, but it's often trade shows when we end up talking on the pod. So why don't I just start the generic sort of question for this pod? What have been the big themes for you this year?
I think your analogy of the coffee is quite accurate in the sense that there are so many things going on at the same time that it's difficult to see what is the big theme of this year.
Killer apps.
No, but if we stick to the show itself rather than the industry development, let's say the show itself, it's quite interesting. It started off with 2 topics. One is API and the other one is fair contribution. Now, those like you and me and many others who have been in the industry for some years, we cannot realistically avoid injecting some cynicism in all of that and saying, okay, so one API, 2006, 2007, fair contribution, 12 or 13 years on.
Yeah.
So I agree, I can't avoid getting into that sort of first impression, saying, wow, deja vu. But things are different now, I think, on both topics are different. But then, and this is from the show point of view. So the show point, kind of, how do you open the show with, mature topics, let's say. But the reality is that the industry is, regardless of how the show opened, it's a considerably different industry. There are like these epic battles going on, like brewing. This is all about agreeing and working together and in a lovely place. But there are these epic battles in the industry, which are not a theme, or they cut across all themes, really. One could be, we talk about orchestration all the time. Where does the orchestration happen? On the device or on the network? That is the number one epic battle.
Do we have an answer to that? Or is that the battle is to answer that question?
I don't think we'll answer it today or even through the rest of the year, but those are big. So if you see what happens today is network operators trying to bring back into the network more and more functions and more control of the experience back onto the networks rather than on the device.
Yeah, I suppose this gets to the heart of what the APIs thing is all about, isn't it? Network exposure function, can we put some of the intelligence and the control and the sexiness back into the network? And yeah, it's...
The sexiness back into the network.
Well, but that's the trouble,
But you've
isn't
been
it?
doing this job too long, mate.
That it isn't. It's. I mean, the APIs they're talking about to me don't sound.
Yeah.
I mean, one of my
sexy.
questions for Vonage was how many. I mean, they talk. I think Kamara was talking about 8 initially that they're making available through this open gateway, but they're not. There's things like location-based, location-based stuff and quality of service on demand and carrier billing. They sound very functional. I don't know.
It's hard to get excited about.
I don't know how much value there is in some of them. That's the thing. They almost sound like things you would expect to be baked into. I mean, when people start talking about a quality of service on demand API, I think, well, is the service not good quality then if it doesn't have this API exposed?
But there are some interesting ones. Like for instance, I was just at the Vodafone just before coming here. I saw an example of the device battery, so where you can do some clever management of what you do with the network in order to preserve device battery if you know that the device battery is running low, which it is useful. I would say it's incredibly useful, especially for an event like this where you can only enter if you can show your badge on your phone. If my phone is about to die, it would be good if I can go onto the Vodafone app and say save my battery, rather than go onto the Apple app and say go on battery
I
save
think about
mode.
that all the time because we're so incredibly reliant on phones, and we'll only get more so. Soon we'll have passports and stuff on phones, and then if your phone gets knackered, you're fucked. So, and then we got people like on the preview pod we did with Dean Bubley. He hates putting other people's sort of random apps on his phone. So
Yeah.
then you got some sort of cultural pushback from certain people.
Yeah.
But yeah.
But I mean, not to say that this is the perfect approach, but the market is completely different. Yeah, I mean, I don't think I particularly love the example of the gamer that suddenly wants to click and find the experience. Those who play games do it at home. Yes, it's a growing market. Yes, it's a market where there's more and more and more money going into it.
I struggle with the whole game thing.
However, let's say it's a bit niche, to be kind. But what I like about kind of the timing of it now is that it's completely different. So where do you access? Who benefits from the APIs, and where do you access it? It's you can find those APIs in your Amazon console. And if you're a developer and you already find your network APIs in the Amazon console or in Vonage, whoever, from a mobile operator point of view, the more the better. Like, find my APIs. Now, who pays for it is a different story. But if the APIs have got values, then it's normal that they get used, and normal that maybe you want, or as a developer, to pay for it. It's the old topic of the two sides of the market. I mean, even Twitter is now talking about charging developers for their APIs. So there is value in that, and if there is value, I'm not saying Twitter strategy is one everybody loves, but
It's kind of all over the place at the moment, but in a good way.
but there is indication from the market that there's a willingness of charging for these extra features.
That also feeds in. Sorry, mate. I'll let you say something. So it feeds into my sort of thing I said earlier about the build it and they will come thing. So not only have we created this infrastructure, but we're not sure what to use it for. But I always think, like, for example, when things like wireless gaming or VR or whatever comes up, I think it's them sort of after the fact trying to find use cases for this low latency thing, which is kind of the most novel aspect of 5G. But it always feels like they're sort of groping in the dark a little bit and not convincing me. Sorry, what were you going to say?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of just expanding on the point I already made about why is quality not there anyway. I just feel...
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things, you talk to people a little bit about 5G evolution and 6G and why that might be different, and you get words like sensing and adaptive networks and intelligence in the network, and it figures out what you need in a certain situation and can provision that. So if that's what we're going towards, then doesn't that the idea is that you switch your phone on and it just does what you want. The network side of it just does what you want it to do.
Yeah.
There shouldn't be this worry about have APIs been opened up properly, to tap into a
From a
network.
customer point of view, you shouldn't be worrying about whether the APIs are there and who is using it and what is doing it.
Yeah.
Try
But
explaining an API to a normal person anyway.
but the applications you use, if they have made
Yeah, I mean, I know this isn't something a consumer should have to worry about. Really, it's a developer thing, and if you can tap into those features and make better use of them, then great. But I mean, maybe there are alternatives to doing that. Maybe in all I'm saying is if we go into the future, maybe the developer doesn't need to worry about that. They just write it and and the network behaves as it should anyway through other means.
And obviously another aspect of it. Yes, the market is different, but differentiation is important for service providers, and there is this unanswered question still: is how, if you all deploy the same APIs, what is the incentive for anybody to go with Vodafone or Origin? And yes, I understand you need to build a big ecosystem where everybody is able to find certain common things, and then it all grows. But at what point are we differentiating on these networks? I don't want to be unkind, but only vendors will benefit from it, because you keep adding feature, keep adding stuff, keep adding new extras. But if it doesn't help you differentiating, then you are just adding costs rather than adding revenues.
That sounds a lot like what you've been talking about. Go on.
Yeah, but so I it was on the record, so I can say I chatted to Red Hat's CTO Chris Wright, and he said pretty much the same thing. He said, you can see the attractions of wanting to do it. From a developer side point of view, it's very, very good, obviously, to write for every network in the world potentially, rather than just 3 UK. But then it makes it a lot harder to differentiate what you're doing from each other. And he didn't say this, what they really want is bigger telcos, 2 telcos serving the whole of Europe or something.
Right.
That's what really makes them the same as Google or Amazon, but that's not going to happen. So
yeah, well, and that is another sort of, Dario was saying how there's deja vu, but we've got sort of newer manifestations, and then obviously a rolling theme forever has been sort of consolidation, and whether European telcos are allowed to consolidate. And I certainly wrote some things before the show, how they're coming up with some noises where they're sounding a bit more favourable to it. It's kind of alongside that fair contribution thing.
I'd personally be more surprised by the fair contribution stuff than maybe a little bit more of a relaxed attitude towards consolidation. I mean, to me, that would make more sense to do things like, let's not be so rigorous about allowing companies to merge, and then when you look at remedies, I mean, if you're going to allow Iliad to come into the market and undercut everybody and create a price war, then you just made things worse, really. So
one thing about the fair share or the contribution is that right now service providers have a level of political support they never had before. So if you remember this show, it was head-to-head with the regulators, with the politicians, like opposite position. Right now, it's for the first time ever, so this is news from Mobile World Congress 2023, we have politicians who are almost aligned with the service providers. And because the market is different, the market is really different. We are not watching cats and dogs falling off the stairs anymore on our mobile phones. We are using those things to... And I know I mean, I do it well sometimes, but it's a different tool now.
Yeah, I wonder if it comes from the right place, though. I think the regulators probably feel, that they've changed their minds because they don't like big.
But that's the thing. The discussion has moved. In some ways, the regulator is not part of this discussion. When people say, "Oh, but BEREC has already said that," they haven't got a leg to stand on. Yeah, but they are not actually. It's above BEREC, so it's a step above. Now they are talking with politicians and say, "Hey, do you remember when I opened up my network to your civil servants and population during the pandemic, and we all relied on connectivity and we all worked on connectivity?" It's payback time.
And even more reason to be dubious about it from my perspective, because Barrett would look at this and go, well, let's look at it economically and let's do some white papers and let's get some really bright people thinking about it. And they go, well, actually, if you look at it, it doesn't really make a lot of sense in lots of ways.
Well,
Whereas Ursula von der Leyen just goes, I don't like Google.
No. It does and it doesn't, but something needs to change for sure. Because everywhere you look, the service providers haven't been able to monetize, haven't been able to do slicing because of net neutrality, but also they haven't been able to consolidate, but also they haven't been able to charge kind of, they also haven't been able to increase their prices. So in some areas, somewhere, they need to give in, or they need to allow service providers to have a return on their investments, which, as we know, it's not covering the cost of capital.
But you've talked about this. Maybe the industry structure just changes in ways that, it's not apparent at first that it's directly linked to that. But then, I mean, you've talked about this, the emergence of tower companies, and I mean that's almost like a backdoor's way of doing some of this. You hive off your infrastructure. Now, we would now see one massive company take shape across the whole of Europe. That I think that's an astonishing thing that hasn't even been written about enough is Cellnex.
Yeah.
I think if you look at how many towers it
did their
had 5
quarterly
years
today,
ago,
didn't
and
they?
it was like a few thousand in Catalonia, and now it's got a quarter of the towers in Europe. And
great success.
and that's happened because of the market structure. Clearly, that particular development. We've got private equity coming in and thinking it's. They like the look of the yields on long-term fibre investments, but they wouldn't want to actually manage customers, people like you and me, on top of it. And that's a kind of an interesting model. We'll see how that plays out with that, with that kind of private equity involvement. So maybe what we end up with is the industry just morphing over the next few years into the actual, what we think of as the telcos become something very, very different. And they become more like MVNOs maybe. I mean, look at what's happening in Italy, where you're from, and it's quite extreme. Darius from Italy, isn't he? Come on, don't make me worry that I'm so drunk that I've got his
I was just joking because he's nice and Italian.
The whole contortions with Telecom Italia are like really. I mean, there's talk of it, not having. It's sold its towers. It doesn't even have a majority stake in its towers anymore. Now there's discussion about it selling its fixed line assets. It would just be, meanwhile it's set up this enterprise business. It's doing some stuff in the cloud. It could become very different from what you think of as like a former state-owned telco in the future.
The market structures are changing, and they are changing rather rapidly, I would say. But that doesn't change the fact that it is more likely than ever today that this big tech will be contributing to the network costs in one form or another. It is more likely than ever. I'm not saying, and I actually don't take position whether it's a just or unjust thing, but it is more likely than ever.
Yeah,
cool.
Sure.
Right, I'm gonna do my newfound time discipline thing here. This is good practice for me when we're back in the UK, trying to not let it go on for 2 hours. Thanks a lot, Dario. That was great. We'll probably see you at the next trade show, won't we?
We've not seen him in London before that.
Network X in Paris.
Oh yes, in Paris. Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, enjoy the rest of the show, mate. And thanks a lot for your time.
Okay,
Cheers. So now I'm delighted. Last night, this was a spontaneous thing. Last night I was sat next to one of my favourite tech journalists, second only to Ian, of course. I mean, telecoms, not tech. George Malim. And so I wanted to invite you on now, George. Please come and sit down. This is sort of working, this tag teaming, isn't it?
Good. I like it.
Welcome, George. It's great to see you. It was great catching up with you last night. So an extra treat with George, because we used to see him quite often, but then he cleared off to New Zealand.
Yeah, I mean, I'm upside down. Yeah.
And this is the first time you've been back since you moved there almost a year ago, isn't it?
First time back in Europe, and nice to come back to a normal MWC, really. Last year was a bit quiet, and it's good to see it back to its former scale, but a few things missing. Not all bad.
So, just the common thread that I'm asking everyone, what's been jumping out at you?
I think there's a much less marketing bullshit. I went searching to see a sign saying 6G.
I'll drink to that. Oh, by the way, do you want a beer?
Oh, I'd love a beer, please.
Yeah, sorry.
I went searching to try and find 6G and 7G marketing, which I was expecting to see, and I've been disappointed. I haven't found any of this excessive overexcitement about the future. And I think it goes back to what previous guests have been talking about, which is that 5G is really hard to make it work. So I think we need to take a step back, concentrate on making 5G work before anyone goes insanely off into future Gs.
Have you seen a lot of stuff this year on the metaverse? Because that was quite a big theme last year.
There's a bit of it about. I saw a woman sitting on her own at a metaverse stand up on the raised walkway, and I don't know whether something was going on for her in the metaverse or whether
Was there anything in her body language that indicated that?
Hard to tell.
Right. Okay.
Hard to tell. May have been a cyborg or something.
Right.
I don't know.
Got it. Well, the possibilities are limitless in the metaverse, so I've been told.
Apparently.
Yeah.
She might have been. Yeah. I mean, I think because there's been such a pushback on by the big metaverse companies or Facebook, obviously in particular, having to make all these cuts, and it's not taken off as quickly, has it, as they would obviously have wanted it to. You talk to people who know about that market, which I don't at all, and they say no one's really using it in any kind of meaningful way. So
Nokia was going on about the industrial metaverse on Sunday, weren't they?
yeah,
I'm still not entirely sure what that is, but they seem to think that's where the action's at, not
well, I think
not
it's more
Mark
of
Zuckerberg
a-
walking around
Yeah,
looking
more
like
of a smart
data out of
factory
Star Trek.
thing.
it's a smart
Right.
factory. It's an XR thing, really, isn't it?
Right.
And being able to, I mean, someone commented to me that it's a short-term thing anyway, because they use it in these warehouses at the moment, where it makes it easier for people working in the warehouses to find things
Yeah,
and work
makes
out how
sense.
to do something. But in
full
about 5
robotics
years, it'll be full
finish it.
robotics
Yeah.
anyway, so you wouldn't need XR in that environment.
That's a good point.
So yeah, that's not a long-term play for someone like Meta. They want to make it. They want to make it the next internet, don't they? And the thing I find weird is it one meta? You talk about the metaverse, but it presumably won't be that. It'll be just lots of different platforms that companies have thrown up. So people now start to talk about metaverse standards, don't they? You got the same issue? Can you have an app developed that works across the different
Right.
platforms?
Because
that are
otherwise
coming out?
you can't be having several little parallel ones.
And then you got, I mean, it's like such a running theme for this industry is standards and compatibility and interoperability, and that's already coming into the metaverse discussion, I think. But I've seen nothing on the metaverse. I saw a massive helicopter type drone thing on SKT.
Yeah,
I don't even know
we've
what
had
that's
to-
doing.
That was, talking about marketing bullshit, bring a toy. But there's far fewer cars. There's very few cars.
We've
there were
had
loads
those,
of cars
3 years ago.
We've had those Black Mirror
There's
robot
dogs.
attack
Yeah,
dogs
the robot dog
going
they always
around,
turn up.
Yeah.
freaking everyone
Well,
out.
there's more of those. They're really frightening because with advances in AI, you can see them all going for someone next year. I want to see one of those Boston Dynamics, like the ones that the kind of humanoid ones.
Yeah, that would be good.
They do somersaults and move like acrobats, but you never see them bringing those. They're probably too expensive.
Yeah, and you can imagine, it's pretty crowded this year. Somersaulting robots is not a good mix in these crowded corridors, I don't think. That could end in tears.
No,
Could be a
definitely
mess.
not.
That's for sure.
I guess there's that kind of. It's always about monetization, and the metaverse is looking hard to monetize. And I think 5G's delayed because it's also hard to monetize, and the experience isn't good enough to monetize. And there doesn't appear to be the shift in business model to support further investment in 5G. And I'm still scrabbling for it, but I can't find it.
Yeah, well, you said in answer to my sort of opening question, you said, you were kind of pleased not to see too much sort of utopian marketing bullshit, and you said, let's do 5G right first. It's not necessarily for you to define, but I'll put you on the spot anyway. You say, let's do 5G right first. What does 5G done right look like? Because I'm still struggling with that.
It's about the business model shifting from being one of selling bandwidth to being one of selling a service. And I think it's important that the operators don't try and do it alone and spend all their time taking a telco grade approach to developing a service that they may then offer to their customers. So I'm thinking a good example would be carriers have lost a lot of income, a lot of voice income because of the move to unified communications. So trying to spin that back and get that kind of high margin business back, because I mean, voice had huge margins and nothing else has anything like it. I mean, if you're reselling Office 365 to an SMB, you're maybe on 10% or 20% maybe. I don't know. I can't pry too hard, and people won't tell me the exact number. but it's not voice margins of 80-90%. So that gap has to be filled. But if you go away and invent an experience that you're going to sell either to consumers or in the B2B market, so I think probably the B2B market is more interesting in terms of getting back to that margin at volume, because there's so many things. But if if it's AT&T inventing a model and an app or a use case that it can monetize for 5G, it's spending all its resource doing that. Verizon will be doing something similar, spending its resource doing that. Meantime, the hyperscalers are just walking around doing something with a global product that they've developed once and sold multiple times. So that globalized, multi-layered approach, the fragmentation can't continue because the telecoms industry can't afford to have 256 national varieties times 3 in each market of an app, because that's 700 times the development load that Google or AWS would have.
Yeah, which is where this API stuff comes in.
Yeah.
But we'll have to see where all that goes.
Yeah. So that was a good answer to a tricky question of what's 5G, what 5G done right. And this is another problem that marketers have, is, we were talking about explaining it to normal people.
Yeah.
According to Howard Watson, you shouldn't be doing.
Shouldn't be what?
Talking about it to ordinary people.
Talking about 5G.
Talking about G's at all.
Well, try telling his marketing department that.
Well, I'm not, I wasn't saying to him what do you.
Yeah.
What about your marketing department? He was giving me his view on we should.
I know. I was just being facetious.
If you put them in front of him, he presumably said the same thing. But we shouldn't be talking about the G's this much. He was saying that he's fed up with all the focus on the G's.
Being slightly less facetious isn't one of the reasons marketing people within telecoms go on about G's, is because it's that once in a generation sort of opportunity to upsell and get people enthusiastic in buying new kit and new services. And so it's kind of inevitable that we're always going to overhype the Gs, because aside from that, once a decade, there's much harder sort of marketing hooks.
But who decided that? It's a technological network change. It's not something that that consumers necessarily give a shit about at all. Now, I know when 3G came along,
that was the first time that people talked about Gs.
But that was because all of a sudden
way.
you'd been used to using voice and text, and you had a bit of whatever edge and GPRS, but you didn't really have good internet on your phone. And then 3G they could position that. They should never really. In fact, I remember having a conversation with someone at the time back in those days, saying before the marketing started, I'm not even sure they're going to talk about 3G to consumers. They'll just sell internet on your phone. They didn't. They had So, but they've kept with it, and that's one of the problems with 5G. It's not really necessarily something that should be of interest to consumers, because it's the absence of other things that they could sell and market that they fill this gap with something.
It should be you can come and do this augmented reality thing.
A really good experience.
Having a decent low latency bandwidth, which you shouldn't use the word low latency to consumers either.
No.
Or bandwidth.
You've got a good experience.
It's just
things
you've
work.
got good stuff.
Yeah, it's not. I think using telecoms jargon certainly counts as a shit chat up line.
Depends who. I've noticed actually there's...
Or maybe a niche chat up line.
There's more women at the show than there have been.
There is that.
Not a huge amount more, I must say. Though it's one of the few events in the world where the queue for the gents is longer than the queue for the ladies, but and that continues.
Yeah. There's more women and there's fewer seats for journalists.
Yes.
Yeah, we had to bring this up. Seems like it should be
point,
appropriate
actually.
to deal with George, because I think it's been shit for journalists, actually, facilities, frankly. They used to have this area upstairs on the walkway
it's very compact.
that was 500 seats or whatever. I don't know how many seats there were, actually. There's a lot of room up there for people. You could usually go up there and get a seat. And it's very accessible to go down to either Hall or 2, which is where most of the action's happening. That's now been given over to ministers.
Well, that was the thing. I found that out in the morning. So I haven't been back to the media village, as they call it.
Yeah.
They got a bit of a nerve calling that a village.
I think people go there once, and then with horror, they never return.
Yeah, I went to look at it. Because I wanted to be able to comment at times like this on how crap it is, because I heard someone say how crap it was.
To be fair, I'm not just saying this because they're letting us film here, but Ericsson stand's been mine from Media Village.
Ericsson stand's been terrific. There's like a whole seating area. You can get a coffee there. There's even plug sockets. So that's the proper Media Village, actually, is Ericsson stand. It's not.
Well, indeed.
And
I think it was. I mean, I understood that they that they downgraded our stuff. I mean, the GSMA will obviously insist they haven't downgraded, but I think they're talking shit.
Yeah.
But it was because it was something that I think Peter was talking about, or I think it was Peter, about the public sector involvement. And the reason they chucked us out of that room is because they got so many more politicians and dignitaries and bigwigs turning up. And I can sort of understand it. I mean, I haven't really been paying attention.
But there's a lot of empty space here that they could have done something with for journalists. That whole area before you even get to that media village is just a lot of empty space with a roof over the top of it. They could have put some seating area there, and it wouldn't have been getting in anybody's way. I know you have to get vehicles coming through to move stand equipment around, but I'm sure you could have done something to make.
Yeah, I mean, how difficult is it to put up a partition? I mean,
it's a huge area. They've got 8 halls or whatever. They could have done something to make it easier for journalists. I mean, they've got 85,000 people. There must be 1,000.
I've got to say though, I'm not a big fan of the media centre anyway, because my question would be, why would you come to an event like this to spend all day topping and tailing press releases in a barn?
You do see people who are there all day,
yeah, like
and I'm thinking, why
are you here?
Why are you here?
You could have done that at home.
Yeah. I do find that a bit weird. Yeah. But I think the thing for me is sometimes just finding somewhere I can plug in and get that laptop recharged again, as much as wanting to sit down and write something. But that's not been good. The setup this year.
I mean, there must be a kind of better correlation between the number of registered media here and the number of chairs in the media village. There must be an algorithm for that. We could apply some AI to it.
I kind of wish I had gone back, because I came the first morning and then just came here and just hung around here.
Yeah.
I kind of wish I had gone back, because I'd like to have seen it at peak. I don't know, lunchtime on Monday or whatever.
Yeah.
And seeing how round it was, because have you been in there a few times?
I only went in on Monday, but it was probably around lunchtime.
And was it quite hectic?
It was pretty rammed. I managed to, standing up, use a shelf to check my email, and get out of there quite quickly because of that. It was standing room only.
Right, yeah, so there we are.
Not ideal.
So raise your game, GSMA, on that one. What else? So back to themes, George. So we kind of covered the 5G. What's the point of it? Is anyone making any money out of it? Anything else jumping out at you?
I think you've probably spoken about many of the things before with AI. And,
your view is unique.
We haven't talked about AI that much, actually.
I think AI and automation are very important pieces this year, and it plays back to everything we were talking about before. Really, I mean, automation is essential to bring the cost of the network down to a feasible level, and also to allow the flexibility for all the new services we're talking about. And AI is actually being applied to the network to enable that automation across all the different domains and in multiple dimensions, which gets back to the complexity you were talking about at the very top. So
my now venerable coffee metaphor. Yeah.
But it is that. I mean, I think that's starting to move, because there's a real realization, particularly in high-cost markets such as the Western European ones, that the automation is essential just to bring the cost down to a level of that has the potential for profitability to be sustained. Because if everything's done manually by a human who is paid to live in Basel or somewhere like that, the cost of living has to be tied to that. Of course, the flip side of that is, if you're, I don't know, a Swiss operator, you can charge more for your service because it's a higher ARPU market than a developing market. So that's an interesting thought. Is the automation needed more in the high ARPU markets or in the low ARPU markets, where potentially manual labour would be cheaper? But that's offset by the fact that the GDP is also lower.
Yeah, I mean, I'm interested in this because just seeing what it means for the size of the sort of telco workforce as well. I mean, because the argument that the pushback argument you always get is, well, what we need automation and AI for are the things you're just talking about, things like addressing faults and ticketing, and there's going to be a lot more of that going on in 5G in the future, and we can't possibly manage all that with people, and it just isn't feasible to do it. But here's the thing: is automation, strictly speaking, means taking out manual effort. Now, if you're only going to reduce cost by getting rid of people, essentially. If you just move the answer normally comes back is no, we can move those people onto other things.
That's the politicised answer.
It's the politicised answer. Now, I'm not saying it definitely won't happen, because because people do get pushed into other areas when things come along that automate other tasks. But you kind of think, well, if they're doing these other tasks, then either those are going to be measurable in terms of benefits, like added sales, or or your costs are going to stay the same, basically. And
although your quality of experience might rise.
Your quality of experience might rise, and you might be able to do things quicker and cope, basically.
Yeah.
But you're still going to have this margin issue unless sales are going up and you're paying people the same. And also, you're probably paying for more software people anyway, who are expensive. So the whole automation as a cost-saving thing is less sort of obvious to me in a way. But if they're going to, if they are going to keep them, and
I mean, it must end in reduced headcount, though. It has to. I mean,
well, that's the trend anyway. If you look at the way the sector's going, and I know it's not all to do with automation. Some of it's just consolidation and normal efficiency measures and stuff. But I know companies like they're pretty public about this. But companies like Orange, when people retire, especially if they're civil servants, they don't rehire, and you sort of think, well, you're doing one of the, what is it, David Graeber called bullshit jobs, They read that book, didn't they? That a lot of people just do jobs that you don't really need, and they're kept on just to sort of make society work and keep them off the street, sort of thing. And then if they don't get replaced, then your workforce is gradually getting smaller. I don't know. It's a difficult one. I don't know how it's going to play out. You kind of worry that the future network is this thing that just sort of runs itself, and the only person on the company is a CEO sitting there drinking coffee in the morning, and a robot brings that to him. And
yeah, and why have the CEO?
And what? Yeah. And then what could possibly go wrong when AI writes its own software and everything?
Well,
runs itself?
we spoke about that on a pod recently. That fun story I wrote about ChatGPT.
Yeah.
Starting to go.
Did you write it, or did you use ChatGPT?
No, I didn't. I mean, I've done the usual thing that lots of journalists have done, which is like write a story in the style of me or whatever. But no, this was other people's reporting. But some US journalists, I think one was New York Times, another can't remember now. But they got in there with ChatGPT and started basically making it go rogue. And in one case, it started accusing them of being the most evil person in the world, like worse than Hitler. And another one said that ChatGPT, which had now identified itself as someone called Sydney, loved the journalist. And when the journalist said, "I'm married," they said, "You don't really love your wife, you love me." It's just great stuff.
Yeah, and then didn't he ask it about his shadow self, and it went, yeah.
Well, it was the shadow self stuff that provoked this.
I don't want to be a chatbot anymore. I want to be a person.
Yeah.
Great.
And I always say, I mean, it's a point of cliche on the podcast of whenever we start talking about automation and that sort of thing, I invoke Terminator, some combination of Terminator and Matrix.
Yeah.
But it does freak me out how willing we are to just sort of surrender to technology.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's the Skynet stuff, which is science fiction, but I think if you move it back a few steps from that, they're now talking about, so there's a thing called GitHub Copilot, which is based on the same large language model that ChatGPT is, that writes software. So you basically say to it, I want you to write this program using this language and using these libraries, and this is what it's going to do, and it does it. And this is presumably going to get more advanced. And you kind of think, well, if people don't do things like that for a long period of time, they lose the skills to do it. It's like old C+ programmers, or going back even further than that. And then we're putting these layers in of abstraction through AI and losing the foundational knowledge. And then if something does go wrong with the AI system and you need to bring people along to try and figure things out again, nobody knows how to do it.
You're like me with my children. I make them read maps, just in case the GPS stops working.
That's a really good example, though. It's like, I've used this before. I remember being a 19-year-old and going to backpacking around North Africa and figuring it out somehow. You talk to people.
That's quite brave. Good. Backpacking around North Africa when you were 19.
It was only Egypt in North Africa.
Okay.
So, but it's still, and the thought of doing that now as a bloke in his late 40s without a smartphone, it would terrify me. If I get dropped off in central London, I don't have my phone on me now. I get a bit nervous. I broke it over Christmas, and I was like, went through this phase of like.
He baked it.
I accidentally dropped it in the oven, as you do.
Yeah.
Not a
normal
common
oven,
thing.
Or microwave.
No, proper oven, 200 degrees.
He did it with his Christmas. He did it with his Christmas spuds.
Yeah. So that didn't work
I hope it
anymore.
didn't ruin your lunch.
Lunch tasted pretty good, actually. It's surprising that
I
you
think
get away with.
we think he started a kind of niche cuisine of sort of circuit board spuds.
Smoked plastic.
So we're coming to a time where we've got to stop, or Pierre's not going to be able to get home.
Yes.
I thought I'd just change the subject. I really enjoyed chatting to you last night, George, at the BT thing, and just hearing about your move. So you basically moved to the other side of the world.
Yeah.
You're a West Country lad, aren't you?
Well, from Bath.
Yeah.
We lived in
That's
Bath
right.
before we went to New Zealand.
So, this has nothing to do with telecoms. I'm just curious to know any sort of highlights or observations or quirks about moving to New Zealand. What's it like?
I think it's the space, because it's the same area as the UK, but with 10% of the people. So 6 million people, and a quarter of them are in Auckland. So it's that kind of thought that you very suddenly are very on your own. So if you're out mountain biking or walking or something like that, you're a long way from other people. And I think that's
What's the signal like? Bring it back to telecoms.
Well, funnily enough, I was visiting a company here, and they had a tool for finding out cellular coverage. And where do you live? They said. I said Wellington, New Zealand. Zoomed in on my on the house that I live in the western suburbs of Wellington, and found out that Vodafone has a less strong signal than its rival. So that was very useful information for me. So well done, MWC, for that to dial down. But yeah, I mean, the cities have great signals. The main roads have good signals. It's a technologically advanced nation, because New Zealand realises that it really needs to be connected to the rest of the world. The government supports technology. Obviously, it's got a 6.5 million population, but the government realises it needs to take up a modern role in the world, and incidentally, it creates more beef than lamb every year. So there are actually more head of
Didn't
cattle.
your Prime Minister quit?
Yeah,
recently?
but
That's
isn't
right.
that good though? Because she felt she didn't have the energy to go for another term, didn't have new ideas, left the way clear for somebody else. I wish that would happen in the UK and in
Well, it happened in
places
Scotland,
too.
to be fair.
Yes, true.
Cool, but you're enjoying it. It sounds pretty. I mean, the cliche. I've never been there, but the cliche is this sort of incredibly healthy, outdoorsy lifestyle there.
Yeah, I mean, it's eye-jarringly beautiful. There's loads of opportunities for outdoor activities. The flip side of that is it lacks a bit in culture, and there is that kind of isolation of being so very far away from the rest of the planet.
People forget it's 3 hours flight away from even Australia,
Yes,
isn't it?
it is. Yeah, two time zones too. I mean, there's a great excerpt from a poem in Wellington Harbour. They have stuff on plaques and floating around in places in the harbour, and it's I'm going to misquote it, but it's basically. Down here, we live on the edge of the world, just like everybody else. In fact, I think it's universe, but it is. Everyone lives on the edge of the universe. In cosmic terms, it's not that far
In
away.
the great scheme of things. So we're starting to run out of time. I'm going to sort of pass the ball to you, Ian. In terms, I've got some sort of like final thoughts about the show. But we've just gone over quite a lot of ground now. Have you got any other thoughts about the show, telecoms themes, the show itself? What you think you've learned from being here? Anything like that?
I mean, I've learned a lot, but some of it's kind of in the weeds.
Yeah.
I don't know if I want to go into that now.
But it's proper techie. But that's kind of that's part of the
It is.
broader narrative. It's very techie stuff, isn't it?
I mean, I don't want to, because I'm often conscious of sounding like a bit of a doom monger and a bit of a pessimist.
You can be a bit grouchy.
I don't think it's been very upbeat, this show on the whole.
Right.
I think there's quite. I think the telecom industry is in a really difficult place now. I know these things like Open Gateway and some of the other stuff they're pushing. Even things like Open RAN are designed to try and stimulate innovation and help make this industry more profitable and successful.
Yeah.
But
actually, we haven't mentioned Open RAN.
it's quite strange that we haven't mentioned Open RAN. Well, we don't have
That
to
was
have
on my
one mention
mind
Open RAN.
too. Actually, it's one of the things I forgot when you asked me.
Yeah.
But maybe there's a reason why we've forgotten it. Maybe it's been less prominent
Well,
than we thought.
I don't think
it'd
Open RAN has been that prominent, actually, this show, is one thing I'd say. There's been a few things, and I've written about it, and I've been talking to people a lot about virtual RAN, which is kind of not quite the same thing, but it
and
gets
that gets
conflated.
properly techie. I still can't get my head around that.
But, and I find that really interesting, actually, just from a sort of vested interest perspective. But for the bigger picture, I just think the industry's in a really difficult situation, and I kind of wonder, and this kind of sums up some of the stuff we were talking about, Dario and everything before. George came on, but they need to figure something out. I don't think personally fair share is the right answer. I'm more sympathetic towards the idea of regulators, doing something sensible on the spectrum front, perhaps, in terms of the way that gets awarded, or looking at making it easier for people to build things, or even being a bit more tolerant of consolidation activity and not blocking things and having these radical remedies. But something needs to give, really, structurally.
Yeah.
And I think the industry itself, they keep talking about, innovation and the lack of it, and not being able to get efforts going. And it's maybe this open gateway, maybe this does start something. It'd be nice to see, in a way. I was a bit skeptical about it in a couple of things I wrote this week, but I would quite like to have that as a story where it actually works out and it does what they're positioning it to do. Because if it doesn't, then this is the industry we're in as well. It's not good for us ultimately.
No, and while us journalists will have a pop, we obviously want it to succeed.
Yeah.
We've kind of got a vested interest, haven't we?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you concur with that? Are there any other things that you're taking away from the show?
Yeah, it is that kind of downbeatness of which always kind of permeates because of it's because of that loss of high margin revenue that and the immense cost of the infrastructure which the operators are having to bear on their own, and maybe that's something that will have to change in some way, because the big hyperscalers aren't going to be able to execute on their consumer activities without CSPs networked, and if CSPs can't afford to build 5G to the level that it needs to be built, the promise of 5G won't happen. So that's the depressing side, that something structural has to change in terms of the business model, because the CSPs are being left picking up the bill while all the good dishes are being pinched by the hyperscalers, and that's the ongoing theme that's been happening for the last five years plus.
And prior to that, there was talk of like OTTs and all that stuff, wasn't it?
Yeah.
When I first got into this 9 years ago.
Yeah, the CSPs have been losing their grip on the jewels of networking. Yeah. But you do wonder if there's a different business model. We're here at Ericsson. Maybe Ericsson may have been happier in retrospect 20 years ago to have sold the hardware as a service to operators and made and borne the stress of the capital investment itself and packaged that out to the market as a service play for the operators to provide services over infrastructure that they essentially rent, so they wouldn't have to go and raise billions every generation. It would just be an upgrade handled by the vendor. But it's too late. The train's left the station, and all the vendors are judged on how many boxes they shift.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, I'm going to start wrapping up there. I've got one last thought that I just reflect on today. I was going around today. I've got to give respect to sort of my team, Andrew Armita here, and Nick and Mary have been incredibly good getting stories up remotely. And I was publishing a couple of Nick and Mary stories, but they were written remotely, but they were referring to Mobile World Congress. So I try and go around and just take photos of stands to put up a relevant image. And I didn't get his name. I went to Deutsche Telekom's one, and there was just one of the normal sort of mid-ranking engineers who do all the little demos and the little video screens. And I was like, yeah, I'm a journalist. He goes, yeah, I know, I listen to your podcast. I was like, fucking hell. And
someone does.
someone does. Well, and it was just really gratifying that this guy. I'm sorry, I don't remember your name. You're hopefully listening to this, but you'll know. You're the Deutsche Telekom guy who I asked about the satellite story that I needed a picture for.
That's when you get recognised on the tube that you've really made it, mate.
Yeah, that happened once or twice, didn't it?
Yeah.
But but the cool thing about it, and sounds incredibly self-interested and self-aggrandising, but I really like coming to shows like this and not being recognised for the ego part of it, but just reminding you that you're sort of plugged into a bigger vibe, a bigger ecosystem, and that there are people here who might listen to the crap we talk when they go for a run or walk a dog or on their commute. And it's happened more than once. I mean, that one guy springs to mind because that was just a couple of hours ago. But I've bumped into a few people where I've introduced myself and they go, yeah, I know, I listen to your podcast.
Brilliant.
I just thought that was really cool. So, so I think I'll wrap it up there. 7 minutes early, Pierre. He's going to make his flight. And I will say thanks again to Ericsson. Thanks again to Ericsson. Thanks. Shout out to John in the background there. Thanks for giving us this excellent space to do this. And obviously, thank you to our audience for listening. And make sure you join. Actually, the next one might feature Ericsson as well. People are going to think that we're in love. So make sure you join us for the next one.